According to the Wisconsin Education Association Council, inclusion is a term which expresses commitment to educate each child to the maximum extent appropriate in the school and classroom he or she would otherwise attend. It involves bringing the support services to the child rather than moving the child to the services, and requires only that the child will benefit from being in the class. After the case Brown v. Board of Education, people then began fighting for equal treatment for schooling for children with disabilities. In 1994, it was decided that schools using inclusion are the most effective way to fight negative attitudes, make an open environment, and attaining the highest education for everyone involved. Inclusive classrooms give significant curriculum to children with disabilities, while special education helps them reach their greatest potential by providing students with instruction designed just for them. The most crucial part of inclusion is not where it occurs, but how it occurs. The state and federal legislation provides suitable inclusive practices, which are chosen based on the codes of ethical and professional conduct. Inclusion is much more than just having children with disabilities in our classroom. It goes beyond that. Having an inclusive classroom spreads into our students' lives, outside and inside of school. It makes everyone a part of a community. Inclusion has many benefits. It shows respect and recognition to those who are generally looked down upon and excluded by allowing them into the general education classrooms. Inclusion also allows students who have disabilities achieve higher academic levels by being included in a demanding classroom rather than in a separate classroom. There are some concerns about inclusion. Some people feel that we are not giving teachers the proper training and resources they need to be successful when switching their classrooms to an inclusive one. The research found for negatives of inclusion is out of date because today inclusion is more common. There are now workshops, training tools, resources, and support for all schools using inclusion in their classroom. There is also a scare that children with disabilities are not getting the attention and help they need in the general education classroom instead of a special education classroom. A concern from special education teachers is how inclusion becomes implemented in schools, along with how to make sure the students are still getting everything they need.
Inclusion affects teachers in many ways. Just like the mainstream students, teachers have to make accommodations for children with disabilities. Teachers need to keep an eye on things in their classrooms, especially if there are children with disabilities and general education students working together. The teacher may need to step in to keep the classroom environment a good place for all students. In some situations, teachers may co-teach when inclusion is in a classroom to effectively collaborate with one another and create the best environment that they can. There are 5 models of co-teaching used. The first is one teach, one assist. This is when one teacher gives the main instruction while the other gives personal assistance to specific students, with or without disabilities. The second co-teaching model is station teaching. This breaks students into 3 groups. 2 groups are working with a teacher while the other group works independently. Students move to the next station after completing the activity or task. Third is parallel teaching. This has both teachers create lesson plans together and splits the class into 2 groups. This is used to teach the same material to smaller groups to promote group discussion. Fourthly is alternative teaching. This is where one teacher instructs and the other pre-teaches and re-teaches some of the students. The last co-teaching model is team teaching. This has both teachers give instruction together. Teachers also are required to have individual education program meetings to discuss how to meet the needs of students with disabilities in their classrooms. It is important for teachers to create engaging activities and movement in their lessons for an inclusive classroom. They also need to implement multimodality and differentiated instruction to help the students cognitively learn.
A benefit of having students with disabilities in a mainstream classroom is that it allows for more acceptance for all students involved. Another benefit of the program is that it shows signs of progress with social and academic situations for all students involved in the inclusive classroom. Students without disabilities have a much better attitude towards people with a disability after being in an inclusive classroom. Students in an inclusive classroom benefit most when there is a schedule set. This helps students stay on task and be aware of what is happening in the classroom.
As stated in Wilcox, a response to intervention, or RTI, is a comprehensive systematic approach to teaching, and learning designed to address language and literacy problems for all students through increasingly differentiated and intensified language and literacy assessment and instruction. According to our notes and class discussions, the Tier 1 is the primary prevention level where basic and core instruction is given to a majority of the students. Tier 2 is the second level where evidence-based interventions of moderate intensity are given. Finally, Tier 3 is a tertiary prevention level, where individualized intervention is increased for students who show minimal response to Tier 2. The President's Commission on Excellence in Special Education believes that students with disabilities should be considered general education students and try and be in an inclusive classroom before being thrown into a special education program. RTI's goal is to provide assistance, services, and guidance to at-risk students as well, not just students with disabilities. After doing this research, I realized that I grew up in inclusive classrooms. When I was in elementary school, I had students with disabilities in my classrooms, but did not realize it was this type of program. I thought it was normal that there were students with disabilities in my classroom and didn't know that in some schools these students were excluded from the mainstream classroom. I'm happy that I was involved in it because it opened my eyes to various disabilities and allowed me to see these students as equals. I have always thought that inclusion is good for students because it allows social contact between mainstream students and students with disabilities. And after doing research and seeing how it benefits all students academically as well, I definitely think that inclusion should be throughout more schools.
I hope the classroom I teach in is inclusive because of all the benefits mentioned for both students with disabilities and without a disability. I learned about this type of classroom at my last school, an Introduction to Special Education. I loved everything this class brought to my attention, including inclusion. As soon as I learned about inclusion, I immediately fell in love with the idea. By the time I learned about this classroom style, I was becoming friends with the entire University of Illinois men's wheelchair basketball team. They taught me so much about how they view themselves and how they wanted to be viewed by the world. Having that experience opened my eyes, and I see the world and the people in it differently. I wish I could have had that experience sooner. I strongly feel that inclusive classrooms give children that opportunity.